Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. A warm welcome, everyone, to our Palmerston North City Council Extraordinary Council meeting for the 5th of December 2024. Before we get into things, I'd like to just go through some housekeeping. That the meeting is being recorded, is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, our normal procedures here, unlike the event of an emergency, we will exit through the green signs. We assemble at the clock tower, Te Marahine, the square. It's a non-smoking facility, and toilets are just as you entered in the link span there. Again, unlike the event of needing a defibrillator, that is located just down in the customer service centre on the ground floor. And if there are any incidences, please, if you could report them to our committee administration here. If I could ask officers or speakers to papers, if they could perhaps just in the first instance give their name and title for those listening online. I understand there is quite a few listening today. We have two councillors online today too, Councillor Barrett, and to join us a little bit later, Councillor Mickelard. So I will now ask Councillor Fitzgerald to open with karakia.
Tēnā koe te kaika, mo atarau ki a tātou e te whare, koutou anō, kei runga te matanui, me karakia tātou. Tūtawa mai runga, tūtawa mai raro, tūtawa mai roto, tūtawa mai waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tākie, Mr. Mayor.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. All right, we looked through to apologies this morning, and we have an apology from the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Marshall Lobb, who's away on council business, and for lateness we have Councillor Mickelard. I'm happy to move those, seconded by Councillor Hancock, and if there's no commentary, we will vote, please. That is passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, move through to our next order of business, which is notification of any additional items. There is none, and I don't think there's anything from the floor. Declarations of interest. Again, I haven't received any. Nothing from the floor. Public comment. There's none scheduled, and there's nothing from the gallery. All right, we'll move through to number 6, and this is around tributes. And I just would like to, before we get underway this morning, just pay tribute to two people who have recently passed in remembrance of their lives and associations that they've shared with the city. Both connect with significant times in the city's history, and both passed on close proximity to each other. One aged 99 years and the other in her 99th year, and both lived lives of note. So Sir Robert Gillies is the first tribute to him as being the last surviving member of the 28th Māori Battalion that trained here at the showgrounds for 3 months in early 1940. Sir Robert Bom Gillies passed away on November the 7th. The second tribute is to Lorna Black, a former Mayoress, who passed away on November the 15th, and whose husband, Desmond Black, was the Mayor at the time of the city's centennial in 1971. So I extend my sympathies of the Chamber to the whānau, families and associates of Sir Bom, members of the New Zealand Defence Force, RSA, and the Palmerston North Defence Heritage Advisory Group. And also to Lorna's daughter, Kathy Gibson and other family members of Lorna who are here and online today. Sir Robert Baum Gillies served with the 28th Māori Battalion during World War II's Italian campaign, and it's really an end of an era tribute, and the lasting connections that the city has with that famous Māori battalion as the city is its historical home. Sir Baum always said that he was only accepting his honour on behalf of his fellow 3,600 Māori Battalion volunteers, many of whom didn't return home. And it's in that spirit and in memory of those men, their sacrifice and services that we just pay tribute today. In the 2022 New Year's Honours list, he was made a Knight Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to Māoridom and to war commemoration, an honour that he previously declined. He was the last of that generation, and unfortunately we will never see them again. And it's important that as a city, we've commemorated the storyboards around Arena to tell that important story, and the city is also home to the adjacent Māori Battalion Hall. Now to the late Lorna Black, born in 1926, and by way of coincidence in the same year as the former Queen Elizabeth II. Of course, as Mayoress, she had more of a direct personal connection to Palmerston North, and from my own experience, I can appreciate how important the role of a mayoral spouse can be. Without close support and understanding of a partner, the role's pretty daunting. A proud Cantabrian, Lorna married her husband Des in 1952 in Christchurch before swapping the flat lands of the Canterbury Plains to the flat lands of the Manawatu. A Palmerston North old boy, husband Desmond, returned from Christchurch to take over the management of Eclipse Wire Products, the second oldest fencing brand in New Zealand that had been run by his father, William Black. During the 1930s, William also had served on the Palmerston North City Council. Active in the New Zealand Manufacturers Federation, Des followed his father's example in 1956 by becoming a city councillor. Lorna, in the meantime, had made herself at home in the city, joining St Andrew's Parish and creating a women's drama group. In October 1968, after 3 terms as a councillor, her husband defeated the incumbent Gilbert Rennie to become Palmerston North's 22nd mayor. Des's mayoralty coincided with a royal visit from the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in 1970, as well as the 1971 City Centennial celebrations. And throughout her husband's mayoralty, Lorna was a huge support. With a reputation as an eloquent speaker, she performed a range of civic duties both as a mayoress and on her own behalf, and was called upon to throw the switch on the famous Centennial lights on Broadway outside the Regent Theatre. Maybe we should do that again sometime. Lorna was also well known as a fashion icon, and one of her dresses that she purchased from Collinson and Cunningham's was to be worn during the City Centennial celebration, now features in the New Zealand Fashion Museum collection. After the centenary, and satisfied with what he had achieved, her husband Desmond chose not to seek mayoralty at the end of 1971. He'd spent 12 years on council and an additional 3 as mayor, and he decided he'd focus back on his family and business. Unfortunately, Des passed away in 1996 and is buried up at Kelvin Grove Cemetery. The couple continued to have a long, active life within the city. Lorna was an avid bridge player and was at the 50th Jubilee celebrations of the club in 1996, and she was the longest serving member. She also sat on the Acacia Birch Trust Board and was an inaugural member of the Palmerston North Probus Club. The last official civic function Lorna attended was as a well-dressed, no surprise there, radiant 96-year-old at the Sesquicentennial dinner hosted by the City on Stage at the Regent Theatre in June 2021. The Jubilee event was sponsored by FMG, whose chief executive at the time was her son, Chris Black. And so this morning in the chamber we express our deep gratitude for Sir Robert Gillies, his wartime service, and commitment to the legacy of the 28th Māori Battalion, and also for the civic spirit and commitment to community that Lorna Black epitomised as Mayoress and as a resident of Palmerston North. So if we could just stand for a moment silence, please. Thank you. All right. We'll now move through to number 7 on our order paper, but before we do that, I'd like to, just because of the nature of what we are discussing and the opportunity for councillors, colleagues to speak multiple times, but in doing that, I just want to say that we'll treat that with the respect that it needs, as we'll go to standing orders option C, around council adopting option C, understanding orders 2.12.3 for item 7, local water done well, assessment of options and consultation process of this meeting. I'm happy to move that, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Councillor Johnson.
I'm not going to be supporting this, Mr. Mayor. I just think this is a complex enough issue without allowing multiple amendments, multiple speaking rights, multiple bites at the cherry. And I think we'll be well advised to consider spending our time wisely, speaking once, and that's the end of it. So I'd counsel the rest of you not to agree to this in the interest of getting through the business today and not allowing multiple bites at the cherry. Thank you.
All right. I wasn't going to say anything because I thought it was pretty straightforward. This is one of our biggest decisions that we make. I would hate to think that we're going to make multiple amendments to it. I'm hoping that you're wrong in that, councillor, in that assessment, and that this is our main paper today that we're discussing. So I don't want to jinx the meeting, but I do hope that we're not here all day. But it does need some serious conversation, and I don't want to limit that. So I do ask you to support it. I do understand what the council is talking about in terms of respecting the right to speak multiple times, and please do that with the greatest consideration. But I do think it is wise to allow that to happen. So we'll put it to the vote. If you could vote, please. And that has passed 12 votes for and 2 against. Okay, move through to our main paper and order of business today. It's number 7 on your agenda, page 7, and this is around local water done well, assessment of options and the consultation process to come. And just ask if our 3 Waters manager, Mike Moynihan, and our transition manager, Julie Keane, come to the table, please. And Cameron, our CFO.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monahan te Kawingwa. Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. And just acknowledge Scott and Meg, who are online, who will be assisting with proceedings today. So we plan to give you a very short presentation, which would just kind of recap the journey that we've been on so far, and also just outline some of the highlights of the paper. And then we'd move into the main question and answer time. And in the sort of essence of the old Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, we've got a couple of people on standby to maybe phone a friend if we can't answer questions for you. And we've also got a couple of people in the gallery who would assist with some of those questions too. So without further ado, we'll just move into things. So councillors will be fully aware of the change of the last government. We had the repeal of the affordable water reform, and now we're working with the local water done well legislation. In August of this year, the government released some of the guidelines on what the new models for the delivery of water services in New Zealand might look like. And they also talked about the financing arrangements. In September, the Act was passed that replaced the previous Three Waters legislation, and that Act made it quite clear that we needed to have a water service delivery plan and an implementation plan submitted and approved by the 3rd of September 2025. And we're anticipating next week perhaps we'll have that final piece of legislation, which we're just calling Bill 3 for now, but that's going to be a piece of legislation that will give us some guidance on the shape and the form of these water service entities. We've also been through a series of workshops, briefings, drop-in sessions with both elected members and keeping our iwi partners informed on proceedings to date. Rangitani in particular have been engaged through the Te Whare Koko meetings. We did have a regional hui just a couple of weeks ago with all the iwi from the Manawatu Whanganui region. And there are more engagement opportunities programmed ahead particularly for iwi through December and February. The service delivery models which were highlighted in the last bill focused on what options were available to local authorities to decide on what the future delivery of their water services might look like. And just to recap, we've got the option of an internal business unit. It's called a status quo, but we're calling it the modified status quo for reasons we've outlined in the report. A single council-owned water organisation and a multi-council owned water organisation. There were other models proposed too, mixed council consumer trust owned models and a consumer trust owned model. During the regional work with the transition team from across the region, these two last options were ruled out during an MCA process. So what that leaves Palmerston North City Council to consider is 4 potential options for elected members to discuss today, and the first one being the modified status quo, which I've just alluded to. That's the current in-house business unit, but with a few tweaks, if you like, things like ring fencing of revenue and all costs associated with delivering Three Waters services. A single council CCO, a multi-council CCO with relatively large local councils, primarily being PNCC, Kapiti Coast District Council, Manawatu District Council and Horowhenua District Council. And then another multi-council owned organisation with the wider Manawatu Whanganui region and any subset of councils within that region. As well as identifying which options council would like to go out and consult on today, we also need to indicate our anticipated or proposed model. My phone's actually ringing in my pocket and it's quite distracting. Sorry about that. I'll try and ignore it. So councillors will be very aware that we have a little bit of a moving feast in front of us, and we're calling out the impact of the changing environment. And what we mean by that is all our neighbouring TAs and councils are in a similar position to us. They're bringing papers to their elected members either at the same time as us, a little bit earlier or a little bit later than us, but they'll all be having the same discussion. And what we know so far is that some councils have already made some decisions, and they're outlined on this slide. We'll just highlight the ones we know of so far, that Manawatu District Council have decided to discontinue further work on the wider regional model, but they have considered to continue working on both an in-house standalone model, a multi-council CCO with Palmerston North and Manawatu, and then that wider CCO with MDC, PNCC, HDC and Kapiti Coast. Horowhenua have already made some decisions. They also have decided to discontinue work on the wider Manawatu regional option, but to continue to participate in more localised models, as you can see there on the screen. What we know is that Ruapehu District Council have opted to continue working on the wider Manawatu-Whanganui option as their preferred option, and then also to continue looking at a subset of those councils. Kapiti Coast have had their meeting, and they've opted to continue to work on a standalone business unit, to continue to work with Horowhenua, and to continue to develop a model with the 4 councils, PNCC, HDC, MDC and themselves. Of the options presented by the government for delivery models, PNCC, apologies, we just explained the 4 options that we're looking at. Of those 4 options, officers have developed a simplified version of the wider MCA process. And what we did was we took 16 criteria, we put them across the 6 themes that the wider MCA model was built on, and we did a little bit of a ranking exercise and then a scoring against those criteria. The results of that are in the paper for you to see. It was an iterative process, as council are aware of. We brought this to you a number of times, and the model that we landed on was to reduce some of the complexity of the ranking by scoring the criteria on a 1 to 3 basis, which is, you know, it's really important to council to being less important. Financial sustainability. So one of the key metrics for deciding which option to go with is whether or not it meets the financial sustainability threshold. In essence, financial sustainability means that the water service system is financially stable and capable of running smoothly over a long term without any financial issues. They use 3 key measures. They use revenue sufficiency, simply meaning, are we collecting enough money to pay the bills and to pay the mortgage? Investing sufficiency, maintaining and improving the quality of our water services to meet our levels of service, and then financial sufficiency is whether the water services have access to enough funding to pay for those large investments such as building treatment plants or replacing major pipelines. The report speaks briefly to shareholding, proportionality and privatisation as being important aspects. We expect that Bill 3 will establish the enduring settings for any new water service system for the government's local water done well programme, and there's a little bit of information in attachment 7 which speaks further to this. Economic regulation, which we've just talked about, is a key feature, and there's going to be a range of matters for consideration with other shareholding councils when we come to a decision on what we land on. And the last thing in our presentation really is just a consideration of stormwater, what we do with our stormwater. system through this process. We already are aware that council will retain responsibility for the delivery of or for the outcomes of our stormwater systems, but you have a choice on how we deliver that, and options have been outlined in the paper. You know, whether we maintain ownership of our assets, but we contract a third party, namely the CCO, to manage, run and operate our stormwater services. We expect that Bill 3 will give us some more information on the detail of that. And that's actually our last slide, councillors. It was a very quick run through, but I think we'll just now take the major reports as read and open the session up for councillor questions. Thank you.
Anything from Julie, Cam?
Not at this stage. I'll happy to answer questions.
No, thank you. All right. I'll number. They're all coming in now. Could I just start off with the stormwater one, which I've always thought has been perhaps mixed up a little bit in some of the dialogue, especially from our neighbours. And to simplify that, Mike, I mean, you probably did sum it up in your brief presentation, but we're really talking about the operations of it, aren't we? The management of it, not the complex issue of ownership.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. It's your decision. Council will maintain liability and responsibility for the outcomes of stormwater services, but it's your decision whether you maintain ownership of your assets or transfer them to a third-party organisation. Equally, your option is to contract the management operation services for stormwater and maintain ownership of the assets.
Because they would differ, wouldn't they, amongst different councils, because it's a bespoke sort of arrangement to the topography of the land. Is that right?
Yep, for certain. I mean, more, your population density changes the makeup of your stormwater systems and what that looks like. But importantly, within a CCO, stormwater is still at the decision of the shareholding council. So, P&C could, if they chose to, contract the services, and another member of that same CCO could transfer their assets into that CCO. It's totally up to this organisation to make that decision.
It'd be messy though, wouldn't it, if one did one thing and one did another?
Potentially.
Okay. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bear. Thanks, Mike, Julie and Cam. Just a few questions. Just in terms of, I guess one of the things that we're actually got to consider is a scale, I guess. And I note that a couple of the TLAs that we are potentially going to want to partner with are looking at, say, for example, a 2 TLA option. Do you have any comments in terms of the scalability of that and the viability of that going forward?
So the LGFA recommended that a scale to make this financially viable, a scale of 60,000 connections is probably where you want to be aiming as your minimum. However, the models that the methods could work. The 2 models that we're looking at, the Capital Coast Horowhenua model has 71,000 connections, and the wider full council, full Manawatu Whanganui has 91,000 if everybody was in, but we've already seen that not everybody will be in.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of the options, like obviously we've got to go out and consult on option 1. And I'm thinking about option 3 and option 4. What additional work would it be? Option 4, because we've got 2 TLAs, which we are potentially going to think about partnering with. They have ruled out the regional option. So what additional work is required for us to actually go out and consult on option 4 as well as, say, for example, option 3? Is that a big ask for the people who are actually working on this particular project?
Councillor, I don't think it would be too much more work for the consultation phase. We could go out, we have a model already which gives us information on, indicative costs going forward. There would be some more work, some more collaboration with our neighbouring councils, but I think we're in a position where we could go out and consult on option 3 and 4 if that was council's decision.
And so it would, I guess, provide the general public with a broader, I guess, understanding of the options which we have already considered or have under consideration. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that'll be fair.
Thank you. And my last question really is just around, with potential partners and TLAs, I guess there is a risk that we'll have divergent timelines and priorities. And of course, we're all going to be going out and consulting on different things, and our communities may come back and say that they will be ruling something in or ruling something out. What happens when we actually end up next year and we've actually got a whole bunch of different TLAs actually saying they actually want different things, and we just can't find middle ground to actually make things work? What is the process from that point forward?
It's my understanding that the bill will allow us to ask for an extension. If we got to June and we were still undecided on what the future delivery model was because of changes in the regional direction, the bill would allow us to request an extension on the water service delivery plan, because that's the, if you like, that's the deadline, is the 3rd of September to have our water service delivery plan submitted and approved.
So it would be a central government intervention.
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pat and I obviously thinking along similar lines. I just had a question about option 3 versus option 4, and this might just be my reading of it, which is why I wanted to push this one now. With option 4 including any other combination of councils, does that not therefore automatically include option 3? Does consulting on option 4 automatically bring option 3 into it, just with less specificity?
That's a really good question. The only difference is Kapiti Coast District Council are not part of the Manawatu Whanganui collective at the moment.
So the any other combination is only within the Manawatu Whanganui region?
Correct.
Okay. That is helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On your slide where you showed where other councils are at, you didn't show whether or not other councils have put forward a preferred option. I was just wondering, have any other councils gone out with a preferred option, or are they sticking just to the options on the table?
I believe, I might just have to get this confirmed for you, Councillor. I believe Horowhenua and Ruapehu have indicated a preferred option. Maybe I'll just get back to you with what those options are. I think we know them, but just so I'm getting them right, I'll come back and we'll answer that question shortly.
That's right, that'd be useful, thank you.
Through the chair, I could probably help there. So Horowhenua's preferred option is multi-council CCO with Kapiti only. That's their preferred option. Kapiti have not gone out with a preferred option. Ruapehu's preferred option is the multi-council CCO, and Manawatu have made an interim decision. They are making their final decision on the 19th of December.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Have other councils made decisions on stormwater and ownership of that?
We're not privy to that information at the moment.
All right. Manawatu's gone out with the Palmerston North City Council and Manawatu District Council model. If through their consultation they decided that was their preferred model and we haven't consulted on it, what would happen then?
We could cover that one in option 4, which is a Manawatu Whanganui wider region or any subset of the above. That could cover us for that one.
I appreciate that, although they do seem like substantially different proposals, large regional model versus just ourselves in Manawatu. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is why PNC CMDC isn't an option that we're considering today as well.
Mainly because we we wasn't aware that that was one of their options until just recently.
Fair enough. And my last question was...
Perhaps I'll also just add to that as well, for you, councillor. I think the paperwork identifies as well that scale is really important. A CCO just with Manawatu wouldn't necessarily achieve the scale that is possibly needed.
I don't disagree with you. I was just wondering in terms of process, but thank you. My last question was on page 26 regarding effectively the proportional representation of the appointment board. It says in point 10.7, appointing the board and agreeing to a joint statement should be a more collective task undertaken on a consensus basis rather than on strict ownership proportionality lines. In terms of mechanisms to achieve that, and I'm sorry if it's in the paper somewhere and I've missed it, but are we considering, for example, a 75% majority requirement or a consensus requirement as part of the proportional model, or is that work that would get done down the track?
So the proportional representation on the electoral college board, essentially, all the conversations we've had with all our colleagues around the region is one council, one seat conversation. So there would be more work needed if that was something that council wanted more information on.
Sorry, no, I appreciate. My question was more around in terms of voting. So let's say 4 councillors were on the board and we all had 1 vote each. In terms of achieving that collective decision making, a mechanism around requiring consensus decision making, for example, so in our agreement for CEDA, Palmerston North City Council and Manawatu District Council have to agree to the statement of expectation. You can't have 3 agreeing and 1 not, for example. So are we considering a consensus model where it's not a simple 51% majority? I'm sorry, I think this is an important point we need to understand.
Yeah, I think that's still work that we need to continue doing, councillor.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe, Chris Tyberg, GM Infrastructure, just on that, that's definitely a level of detail that would get into. I think the point that Mike's made out is there some high level principles that have been, people have put a line in the sand on in terms of the 1 vote, 1 council, but in terms of the issues raised, they are some, issues that would get worked through when you're developing the constitution for the CCO once you had it. Because I think then there's a whole lot, when we're developing the sort of the organisational constitution, there's a whole lot of things you get into. There's reserve decisions, there would be, there are protections against privatisation, but if you ever got to the point where you're talking about issues around ownership and what have you, that would obviously not necessarily be done on a one council, 1 vote. It would probably default to proportionality for shareholding. So I think there's actually a whole lot of detail that as you're going through that level that you would get to.
Thank you. I'll ask my last question on that then, Mr. Mayor. The reason I'm interested in it is my comfort with 1 council, 1 vote considerably varies depending on the way in which that vote is applied. And so in terms of how we go out to public consultation, what will we be saying to the public around 1 council, 1 vote? Will we be saying it might be a 51% majority, it might be 75, it might be consensus requirement, we're not really sure? How are the public supposed to have confidence in our decision if we don't know how it'll be applied?
I think the best thing that we would have to do is to assume it is sort of strictly it's not a consensus necessarily. Okay. I guess there's comments that have been made around sort of consensus, and I guess if you think about the nature of that committee and what they're doing, probably and we've highlighted probably the 2 key tasks. One is the appointment of directors that often, and because the directors are going to be appointed on the basis of skills-based board and what have you, I suppose what we're saying, our advice is that that's probably more likely going to be fairly less contentious, because hopefully the people's skills and relevant will so it's not something that you'd necessarily have a local view on. And then the statement of expectation, which will probably have different elements to it from the different regions that bring in. So if you think about those 2 jobs and how they would work, while consensus is obviously something you go for, everyone should be able to be comfortable with the decisions they're making. That would be the officer's advice around that.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Could just further to that, because it is good points, but and even though it's a bit further down the track, be fair to say though, Chris, and maybe even to the CE, there's going to be a heap of regulations around this because every water entity is going to be facing quite similar sort of conversations, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent point. So, and I suppose I'm drawing on my experience working in electricity and telecommunications. And so I think the thing that we need to understand that if you think about statement of expectations that we have with our current CCOs, which they can be very directive, you can't think about the statement of expectations like that. It does provide the board some guidance around what we would like, but at the end of the day, they will be meeting their regulations in the first instance. That's their obligation. And so really, they'll only look at the statement of expectations to the extent that they are consistent with their obligations to the regulator. So I think if you think about a statement of expectation as a core accountability document, you've got to water that back to something that is more like it's a request as opposed to a demand almost. So therefore, the regulator probably becomes the core accountability function as opposed to this committee.
Is that like in the same way the airport pretty well can't operate if it doesn't comply with civil aviation?
100%.
Right.
Yep.
And then secondary speaks to us about as the owner. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Isabellin. Sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Most of my questions have been asked and answered already, so that's good. I just one question. So my read of this is that with whatever change that happens, except for option 1, council would no longer have anything to do with or be accountable for water service delivery, except for financially underwriting it, except in the case of stormwater. Is that correct?
Mainly correct, yes. Yeah, as Mr. Dyberg just said, there would still be shareholder owners and the statement of expectations, etc. But the technical board would be the responsible for managing and operating and running the new companies.
Thank you. And so my question there is, for stormwater being sort of the difficult child there, if we contract out stormwater service delivery, who's performing the strategic planning function for stormwater and the forward work program, noting that we've got a city strategy for stormwater being developed and that's a few years away? We might have something in place that might change the basis on which we're proceeding with that work. So what happens apart from the accountability, what happens with the strategic planning?
I think it's quite hard to answer because we don't quite know yet, but I imagine that the owner, PNCC, would still be responsible for the strategic planning piece, and that would be determined for execution through some kind of service level agreement contract.
Right, so that's sort of more of a concrete or more directive than a statement of expectations that Chris was referring to earlier with the demand versus the ask sort of dynamic.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that's just for the stormwater piece, yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And also just about for option 1, apart from being a legislative requirement, to me it seems consulting on that option is sort of redundant because it's not compliant with a lot of the things that are going through. Have I read that right?
Correct. We have to consult on it. Yeah.
But we can't make that option work under the new forms.
Under the reform.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Councillor Dennison, somehow you've got yourself into the queue without me. But anyway, you go next.
I'm not sure how. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question in relationship to the wording of recommendation C, 3C. Just in the D option, it had or any other combination of councils, which is relating to a earlier question. Could that or any other combination of councils be tagged along to after the Kapiti District Council wording if we're talking about an option with just Manawatu District, if we went with option C? Why has that not been included with the any other combination of councils in that option?
It's a very good question, Councillor. I suppose we could take that away and do some further consideration. I think option D, we have a more thorough model on kind of levers pulling councils in and out, so we know what would work and what wouldn't work. I don't know if we've explicitly done that work for option 3.
Just further on that, Mr. Mayor, just through you, with C, if we were to include that though, would that not capture if we ended up just working with Manawatu District Council, covering that option, rather than trying to tag the option D into it?
I suppose the answer is yes.
Okay, that's fine. That's actually the only question I have, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've got a long list. Just prepare. Okay, on page 25, in point 10.5, it says participating councils exploring a multi-council CCO agreed key principles for the approach, and then it lists the key principles. So when was that agreed and by whom?
It was mainly agreed through the transitional work across the 7 councils at the and at the mayoral forums and the direction of the regional CEs.
There was no decision taken around this council table to agree those principles.
That's correct.
Thank you. The paper is a little bit silent on the role for iwi on this water entity, apart from saying that iwi have been informed and that consultation will occur later. Can you flesh out what you see as the role for iwi and how they would be involved rather than informed on the entity going forward?
That's a difficult one for me to answer, Councillor, because
I might just get the CE to answer because he's had more involvement.
Yeah, through the chair. The conversations have been very productive with Rangitane and Manawatu in particular. We have highlighted from our end about the process that we're having to go through, what has been asked from us from government in terms of progressing this particular reform. Personally, myself and my team have felt rather uncomfortable about the absence of iwi conversation in this process. So, as was highlighted in the initial slides, our intention is between the decision that you make here today and going out for consultation is more in-depth conversations with Rangitane or Manawatu, and they are comfortable with that from the last conversation that I had with them.
Okay, that does answer the piece about the process, but where is the answer on their involvement in the entity once it's up and running?
That's still work in progress. How iwi fit into governance arrangements, te manu o te wai, all of those sorts of things as well are key issues that's, in my view, still to be worked through about how that fits in. And I don't have a decent answer for you today on that.
Could I just add, there was a couple, and it might be hidden in some of the papers somewhere, where there was other examples of what Watercare do with their Māori or iwi leaders forum, which feeds into the SOI, the work program, and of course the skill-based director, ensuring that there is an element of Te Ao Māori sort of viewpoint around some of those skills that are required. So from the mayoral forum, we all were quite uncomfortable with the process, and we just had to remind our partners that we were a part of the process as they were from government, because this is a government legislated process that we're going through. But to ensure that they get in at the start is to have some sort of forum that is mandated to speak to the board directly, and it has some sort of mandate is where the mayoral forum got to.
Perhaps I would just also add the other complexity of this is that you have a number of options in front of you, and until a decision has been made, it's which iwi are we having conversations with. So our immediate conversation is with our iwi partner, Rangatani and Manawatu, and keeping them informed about where we're at. We've briefed them on this paper, so they're very much aware of this today as well. They've been provided a copy of it at the same time that you were, and keeping them informed. But until a final decision has been made about which dance partners we will have, that will also then determine about what are the further conversations with other iwi and instruct how they, as a collective, then fit into any future model.
Thank you. We'll have some comments about that later. In terms of implications for staff of any of these particular models, has that been taken into consideration?
We've been bringing staff very firmly along the journey with us. We've been having regular meetings with the wider teams. Implications for any of these. Our intention at this stage is that the workload is going to increase, not decrease, in the future. So we, but until we know what we're standing up and what the shape of the organisation looks like, it's difficult to say with any certainty what the future organisation structure will be. Only to say to our staff that our intention is that anybody who is currently working in the sector, there will be work in the sector in the future.
But that hasn't been factored in as part of our decision-making matrix.
None of the decision-making matrix. We factored it into the MCA process.
Okay, how was it factored into the MCA?
Retention and attraction of skill-based staff.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I may have misunderstood this, but this modelling for the Palmerston North wastewater treatment plant not to be included, how would we proceed with the wastewater treatment plant not included? Or is that merely to illustrate that the inclusion or not of the wastewater treatment plant from Palmerston North wouldn't make a significant difference?
I'm happy to hand over to Cam if you would like to.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's my understanding that particularly the multi-council options that you have in front of you and the modelling that has taken place, I believe the Morrison Low modelling actually includes the wastewater plant in, and my understanding with the GHG modelling was there were scenarios with the treatment plant in and the treatment plant out, and I don't believe it made a significant difference. So certainly from my perspective, on a financial perspective, very financial perspective here, a good outcome financially is with the wastewater plant in, because the funding that you're likely to achieve to fund that through LGFA would be cheaper than what you would get through an IFF.
No, I understand all of that. Yeah. My question is, it was included in the modelling with it being in and out. And as you say, and I understood, it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the overall costs, although it makes it easier for us, obviously. But is there actually a scenario where we could go into an arrangement with a group of other councils and our wastewater treatment plant not be included?
I might just get the CE to answer that, because that's been asked before.
Yeah. Through the chair.
What, today? Has that been asked today?
No, other mayors have asked that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So the options going forward is that, and again, it does depend on what it is that you might select in terms of any final decision, but any CCO, multi-council CCO would have the wastewater treatment plant in that CCO. The reason why the GHD modelled it in and out was, to come to your point, was to satisfy the other councils that it didn't have a big impact over time.
Okay, so we're not actually at risk of a scenario where it's not included. I couldn't see how that could happen.
No, and the other reason for that is that I did ask my colleagues around the Manawatu Whanganui area to think about future wastewater plants that their councils may wish to be implementing and who might end up needing to be paying for that.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. In terms of the legislation that's to come later this month, what do we know about that legislation, whether or not it would have any bearing on the decision that we have to make today?
Councillor, all indication that we've had through the sector is that it's going to have no material difference to the work that we've already done.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm nearly there. In terms of which council we might go in with, some of these other councils have got different methods of charging for water than our ratepayers are used for. So, for example, Kapiti, I know, use water meters. So, has there been any discussion yet on whether going in with, let's say, Kapiti as opposed to other councils might result in ratepayers in Palmerston North ending up with water meters? Or are water meters coming for us no matter what we do?
I'll get the CE to answer that one.
At the risk of a leading question, I'll hand over to the CE.
It's interesting the way that they just batted all off to the CE.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, for that special question.
I'm surprised no one else asked it. Really.
Yes. My view is that at some point in probably the not too distant future, that this council will have to seriously think about considering the decision about whether it implements water meters or not, and the benefits or the advantages and disadvantages of doing that. So that is a decision point that is coming possibly in the near future, but it's not on our radar yet, but the modelling did demonstrate that in order to get some kind of consistency around charging for water across multiple entities, that you need to have a think about the approach that's taken around that. So my view is that a decision will be coming probably to this table.
So just in terms of the decision we have to make today, though, whether or not a particular other council that we might consider going in with uses water meters doesn't really have a bearing on whether we might have to use water meters.
No, it does not.
Okay, thank you. Last one for now. In terms of how the, I guess, services and needs of Palmerston North residents might be prioritised in a multi-council water entity, how can we, and maybe we can't, can we even avoid the scenario that we've encountered in some other situations where we're in with other councils, where what we consider to be a priority for our area, let's take the Regional Ring Road in the Regional Transport Users Forum, is then not prioritised by other councils, and so we're in a situation of competing priorities between different councils, and maybe we might not be satisfied with where the priorities for our particular residents end up. Is there any way of avoiding that scenario, given that you've already said that proportionality isn't a goer?
So my understanding, Councillor, is that when the new water entity is stood up, regardless of who the members are that make up that entity, that the priority will be legislative through the likes of drinking water standards, Taumata Aroa's wastewater standards. So it will be legislatively driven for those levels of service. I don't know if council, once it hands control of to CCO, would have any influence on whether Palmerston North got a new wastewater plant before another member. It would be based on the needs of the regulation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Perhaps I'd just also add to that as well. We all fed in our long-term plans into the process as well, and 30-year infrastructure strategies about the pathway and the plans that we do have ahead of us. So those sorts of things will be factored in, but also just coming to your point, and it's probably just been highlighted quite recently with the recent decisions around Auckland Transport and repealing the legislation that to bring back control to the local authority in terms of how roading, water, all of those infrastructure needs are needed for the region and the city and that moving forward. So I think that they are key points that still need to be addressed and worked through as part of this. So certainly take those on board.
Just before I go to Councillor Barrett online, just further on from Councillor Johnson's questions around water meters. We've got trade waste, we've got DC's development contributions for infrastructure, which includes water assets. Be fair to say that not everything's 100% even. There'd need to be more of a uniform sort of approach, longer term.
Yeah, that would be correct, Mr Mayor. I think that an important thing to note is that there's not going to be a switch on day one where everything becomes harmonised. There's going to be kind of a runway leading approach to establishing these organisations, and over time there'll be the things that you'd work through over time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Mike. A few questions here. Firstly, just to confirm in terms of stormwater, looking ahead, regional councils will still have a regulatory role there?
Yeah, we believe that's the case, Councillor.
Thank you. Can I ask then what information we have to hand already in terms of the potential benefits or disbenefits of setting up an entity that would be reporting to two different stormwater masters through being across regional council lines?
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say we need to do some more work in that space. We haven't done a thorough piece of work around those regional lines.
What would be, I guess, the timeline for that kind of information being able to get into this process?
Yeah, I guess depending on the decision that council make today, we'd need to come back and go away and evaluate what work could be needed and how quickly we could turn that around.
In terms of what's happening around the country, are there many examples where potential partnerships are shaping up across regional council boundaries?
The only ones we're aware of are mainly down in the South Island, some of those larger areas.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to move on to gain your perspectives a little bit more in terms of scale. Usually when I've heard scale used, it's been around number of connections. And I just wondered what information we have around scale as it relates to geography and distance, and how there might be any interactions there in terms of the scale of number of connections versus the scale of the distance that one needs to go to find the next connection.
Yeah, certainly. It's a really good question. And I know for sure that one of the models that we've used has considered connections per kilometre as well as number of connections. That's been mainly for driving efficiency metrics within the model. but it is, it is quite an important factor, is connections per kilometre.
So the sort of things that are coming through in the consultant reports, have those taken into account that aspect?
I can't speak with any authority, but I do know the Morrison Lowe report did include that as one of its metrics. Was scale, number of connections, plus also connections per kilometre. So the more population density does have a bearing on efficiencies and things.
Thank you. I guess that brings me to the reports in terms of the two different consultant reports. So apologies if I'm oversimplifying it, but it seems to me that the numbers are rather different between the two. Why is that?
I will tag Scott Manser in, who's online, if that's okay. But essentially, different assumptions have been used in those models. But I will hand over to the experts rather than me get it wrong.
Morning all. Apologies for being online rather than in the chamber this morning. Mike's quite right there. There's a number of different assumptions that the different consulting firms have used into their models. It is really important to note that the Morrison Lowe numbers are real or uninflated, whereas the GHD numbers are inflated. So that actually drives quite a significant difference in those long-term costs. But yeah, definitely a number of different assumptions in the models used by the different consulting firms. And we still need to do some work to dig into exactly all of those assumptions over the Christmas break before we come back in February.
Can I just add to that though? I think also it's important to note that the general trend or outputs of those models, despite the differing assumptions, tend to lead to the same conclusions. So it gives me some sort of comfort that different modelers will have slightly different assumptions, and they'll state those assumptions, but you would still expect to get to similar conclusions if the actual base is factually correct.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. A couple more questions, Mr. Mayor. Looking at options 3 and 4, what could we say are the primary differences between options 3 and 4 and Wellington Water?
Apologies, Councillor. Could you just clarify the differences between our options and the Wellington Water model? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I may have to come back. I'm not massively aware of the intricacies of the Wellington Water model. Maybe that's something we can come back to you with, Councillor.
I could make a few comments. Just a couple of things on it in particular. So thinking about the Wellington Water model it's very different. You can't compare it to these water services entities. And the biggest difference being is the water services entities will own the infrastructure and they will collect the revenue. The way the Wellington Water works, and one of the biggest challenges they have, is they don't own the assets and they don't have any control over the budgets. So they have responsibility for service delivery, but they don't control how much money they've got. So they have this big negotiation with their shareholding councils in relation to that, and then they have to basically live within their means and whatever they get. The big difference here will be is that the boards of these entities will have to make sure that they are investing in their assets in the right way, and they are collecting the appropriate amount of revenue to pay for that work. I think if you sort of take that into account, they are very, very different things. And so what I would encourage you not to do is to look at the Wellington Water model and say, is that what we're getting ourselves into? Because it definitely isn't.
Thanks, Chris. That's helpful. Final question is just around that table of criteria and relative importance that they've been given. Thinking about community consultation, will we be going out to the community and saying, this is the relative importance of all these things, what do you think? Or will we be going to the community saying, these are the things we need to consider, what importance would you as the community give them?
I'm going to ask the audience and maybe ask Liv to come in and take that question.
Good morning, I'm Olivia, Comms Manager. We have started working on what the submission questions would or could look like. And at this stage we are looking at kind of two key themes. So one of them is what matters most to you, so going through some of those kind of things like cost, like say in decision making, all of those kind of criteria we use in an MCA, then asking them to rank the options in terms of what they would like from most to least and why they feel that way about those options. We are open to more questions if you want to fire them our way.
That's great. Thanks, Liv. That's really helpful. That's it for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you. Thank you, team, for the work you've done. My first question is about option 3 and 4. What happens if we don't secure the partners we want to secure?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I guess fundamentally option 2 potentially becomes important to us and how we could make that work, or I guess really we would work harder with our neighbours to kind of secure those partnerships.
So you're saying option 2 is a fallback position?
I'm saying we need another look at option 2.
Okay. Just trying to read between the lines of what you're saying. Going to page 24 and looking at the risks of 8.4, can you tell me what the mitigation strategy would be for that?
Thank you, Councillor. Julie Keane, Transition Manager. Just in response to your question, Councillor, essentially one of the mechanisms that would be put in place in standing up the CCO would be to establish a shareholding agreement. And so I think that would be how we're going to, what the principles we would like to operate under would be included. So that would help in terms of mitigating that risk, and that would be something that each council would agree to.
Before it was in place?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, team, for all the work that's gone on. And forgive me if these questions sound vague, but I find this whole topic a bit vague in terms of and Liv, thanks for joining them before. Do we have an understanding of when the consultation period is likely to start and finish?
At this stage we are going to bring the draft consultation doc on, I think it's the 5th of Feb, and then we would be looking to start consultation around the 20th. We just need a little bit of time to make sure that we can get information out to households, and just because of the number of houses we have, we need a bit of a print lead time there. It does look like we will be one of the first councils in our region to consult. And we're still working through with the other teams what that looks like when we're all consulting at slightly different times, and how we can provide different information to each other to help our communities understand each other's different water elements. Yeah.
Sure. Liv, you mentioned before that you've started building the frames of those questions for the consultation. Given there's so many unknowns coming out of central government, what's the risk that our community is just going to be completely confused and not be able to offer us the feedback that we really need to hear from them?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really tricky one that we'll probably hear from a lot of people, just like how I guess all of you are feeling that way to an extent as well. We can give them the information we can give them, and I guess it's just, I guess, about keeping them informed and up to date through that process. And if things change, it's about, how do we keep getting their feedback and making sure that they can kind of keep feeding into the process as you get through those decision-making processes. It is just really tricky with the timelines we have.
Yeah, for sure. And further on from that, for example, in the consultation, when it comes to the financial sustainability area, there is an expectation, like many of us here today, that we expect to see some numbers, but we're not able to provide that.
Yeah, we're working with the finance team about what level of numbers we will be able to give our community, because that's one of the key questions they will be asking. But we will need to put some really good explanations around those assumptions that we have made, so that, you know, it's not like a number that's set in stone in their head for if something eventuates.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I appreciate how difficult it is for the officers as well. Mike, coming to you, this is around autonomy in the council-controlled organisations. What's the elected members' roles of each council within that governance structure? Where do we get to feed into?
It's our understanding, of course Bill 3 will clarify this when it's released, but it's our understanding that the shareholding councils will provide a member to the Electoral College Board, who will be then responsible for establishing the skills-based board for the new entity, and then, you know, the levels of expectation, statements of intent, etc.
For sure. And picking up on Councillor Johnson's question about iwi representation, and I completely agree with her in that, in terms of sharing information with and informing the iwi is not the same as the iwi sitting at the council table. In the multiple council-controlled organisations, is there scope or possibility for a seats to be made available to the representative iwi of whatever region, district or region services those councils?
I'm
I'll
not sure if
go to
that
the
question
CE.
was answered before, but I'll pass to the CE.
Yeah, those are all the things that we're currently looking at, and think that it's probably entirely appropriate to do so.
Sure.
It may even extend to how selection is undertaken for the board of the CCO.
Wonderful, thanks.
But Councillor, just remember, we're not in control of this process. We're not setting the rules. We do have some influence, but we're being told what to do.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. But you'll appreciate that it's a valid question.
Oh, absolutely.
From the floor, so thank you.
Absolutely.
To Chris's reference of the Wellington City Council, who don't own their water assets, do all the councils that are mentioned in this council-controlled modelling own their water assets?
To my knowledge, yes.
Beautiful.
Maybe
That's it for me.
should just clarify the point I made about Wellington Water. So Wellington Water, which is effectively a CCO, today they don't own them. They don't do that, but their councils own all their assets. I suppose my point was that the Wellington Water CCO looks after them on behalf of those councils, but they don't control the revenue, and they don't control the budgets and what have you. And that was the big distinction that I was trying to outline. Yeah.
Also, just to add, there's been a couple of bits of comment around costs and how we might go about that. I'll have a bit of a chat to the team. Liv will hate me for afterwards as well anyway, but rather than just getting information out to our ratepayers, we'll have a think about how other ways that we engage. We've done some different ways of engaging through the LTP process and the like as well. I think that just given the significance of this and having people being able to have drop-ins or those sorts of things and come in and have their questions answered in person might be useful as well. So we'll bring all of that back to you as well as part of the report in February.
A Waters Expo. Just what we need. All right. Okay, that is questions. Thank you to the officers. Thanks to colleagues. All right, we have the local water done well assessment of options and consultation process. We've got some recommendations there. Councillors, I'm going to look to move 1, 2, 3A, because we have to by legislation, option 1, option 3 and option 4, 4 and 5. And I'll look for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. And I'll just give you some thinking around that, or my thinking around that. And I do have a favour. I mean, I think option 4 is good and it's a catch-all. It enables a little bit of agility to us if there is something that comes out of left field. This is a scale decision, really, in that sense. Yes, I said. I'll start again. Option 1, option 3 and option 4, and obviously 1, 2, 4 and 5. The same thing, councillor. Option 1, which is A, C, option 3, and D, option 4. Okay, thank you. Clear as mud. All right. So, look, this is a conversation about scale, and I think the officers articulated that well. Although it's not a population scale, it's about what assets there are. It's connections, and have a think about some of the other councils in the wider region. They're mainly rurally based. To give you an example, Horowhenua is more urbanised than Manawatu, significantly more urbanised. They have very, very different amounts of connections. Kapiti is more urbanised. We're definitely more urbanised than rural. So there, it's that scale. It's all with that comes better affordability, and I appreciate that some of the numbers and the modelling are still to be really confirmed. But it's evident that the sub-regional model gives us some scale, some level of affordability, which actually over time makes water costs decrease if it's managed well. I think the 4 councils in that sub-regional model are well-run councils. They do have good assets. Some have water meters, some are starting water meters. Just to give you an example, Horowhenua have rolled out water meters in Shannon, and they've found a 70% decrease in the use and loss of water. And it's made some significant changes and cost savings to operations, the way they run plants, the way they plan for plants. That is the benefits of water meters. And it is an element of user pays rather than everybody just leaves their sprinkler on all night and waters the garden. You have to pay for it. In that sub-regional model is 71,000 connections, 230,000 people. It has the revenue sufficiency to operate. It has scale in the workforce, and I just want to acknowledge our workforce, or some of our workforce in the gallery, and I'm sure there'll be quite a few online. Thank you for the work you do here in Palmerston North. But it also gives some training opportunities. If you think about the numbers of people involved from the 4 TAs, there's real opportunities and aspirations for that sector. And also the other thing is the 4 neighbouring TAs are within quite close proximity of each other. Remembering that Manawatu's connections are mainly fielding. They're not at Rangawahia or further up the line. They're actually closer to the urbanised base of Palmerston North and the south. And there's closer communities of interest, I believe, than the wider Horizons region. But I don't want to completely extinguish the wider regional opportunity, and I think that's why 4 is a good option. 4D, option 4 is a good catch-all for us. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. I think there's a lot of, excuse the pun, but a lot of water to go under the bridge as we talk to our wider community. I encourage our officers to think about maybe a bit of an expo. It was well attended when we did that around the LTP. It actually, people sometimes came in with an opinion and left with a different opinion because they'd spoken to elected members, experts, technical experts, officers, and they understood the things and the issues better. I think that would be good to do. It is quite complex, and I'd have to say, as a council, we all seem to be over it pretty well. And I'd have to say, having spoken to some other councillors around the wider region, the eyes glaze over a little bit when we start talking about this. So, and they've asked us lots of questions about Palmerston North, and I'd have to say everyone's got their own nature calls. It's just a matter of when, at differing levels. So think about the scale, think about that scale question. Are these councils well run? The 4 in option 3 are, and their assets are in reasonable order. So ask you to support those recommendations. Thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to support these recommendations. I think the wider we go, the better at this point, and it's fair for our community to have their say. Several points I want to make. One, again, is around the pace of change is a level of uncomfort. Understanding this is legislative, and the fact that we're still going out making decisions without the last part of government framework being announced, and we're lining up what we're going to consult our community on. I think it's really unsatisfactory in my view. And when we are honouring the mayoress of a former mayor, it's in the early part of our meeting, it does give mind to the forefathers of our city and of our other districts about how much blood, sweat and tears went into putting in the dams and all the water infrastructure and making sure our cities were well served with the wastewaters and all that sort of stuff. Years and years, decades, our forefathers' investment, let alone our own overview and our operational staff and all the staff that expertise, and then have decisions made on the fly within months, and then kind of concurrently with other councils trying to throw it all together, and we go from one colour government to another coalition, and I think why they went about reform and repeals and all this other stuff, and then throw it together, water done well. I'm being quite critical because I see this as, local water done well. I almost see this actually being local water being thrown together in a big blender and seeing what other councils throw together and see what we end up with, and consult our community with actually very little optionality. And what's the consultation document going to look like when we get a book like this to make our decision? I just want to put a dissatisfaction stamp on this. I think the pace of change and the information is so unfair, when we're doing a reasonable role of governance and the operation of water here locally, as it is, local water done well, and I feel there's a real threat of throwing it together and actually getting our local water done substandardly, to be honest. And maybe that's the title of the government's policy. That's the first point. I want to get that clear. I want to make sure that everyone understands that is my view. The other one is a fair point that come through in questions is around the need to consult on option 1 with the internal business unit. Totally, what's the point? Totally, what is the point apart from saying this is one here to try and, illuminate how much better it's all going to be when we look at these other option 2 or 3? And actually, if we were being real with the way forward, the option 2 would be a much better one as our starting point rather than consulting on the internal business unit, because we know for the funding would come through the owned water organisation as a single council. That would be a much better option to consult on rather than being mandated to consult on the current status quo. So that's the second point. Even though it's covered in the recommendations otherwise. Let's be clear now too, I've got a level of comfort with the representation arrangements, which will come subsequently, I understand that. But at our last formal meeting, and that's where I want to reference back, we did have a position that we wanted to have an option around the representation being proportional to the shareholding arrangements. And just to cover that off, I've got a much higher level of comfort around the equalisation of the one vote to the shareholding, regardless of the scale of the council, and that being a fair way forward. And so, therefore, I just want to sign that off. because the influence that it actually has is really around the original appointment of those electoral college appointing the directors, but thereafter there's financial checks and balances, and there's framework to make sure that that's all has integrity. So that equalisation of representation against the shareholding council, I've got a level of comfort with, so I want to complete that point. And so, yeah, the general themes is around scale, and I think at this point we want to consult on as many councils as we should. My questioning around any other combination of councils and being included in C, I don't think is necessary if both C and D are both passed today. Otherwise, I was happy to include that in C if that was the sole recommendation being provided in that case. But otherwise, Mr. Mayor, I think I want to credit the staff for how much work they've done. Our transitional consult, I think, also really been helpful to have regular updates at the briefing sessions, and that all-in regional event we had at the arena where we all kind of presented where councils were at and having a few questions and answers, although that was a pretty quick hop and stop on each of the issues. It was helpful to be with our neighbours to kind of see where they were coming from and to hear their concerns or bouncing thoughts around in that space. So that was a helpful part between the last meeting and now to get a comfort of where we're heading. And our eyes up. I think the Kapiti Coast District Council is a really appealing option to partner with Horowhenua and Manawatu in that way. So I think C is in this information on what's been weighted with the financials that we do have and the MCA. It does stand out to be a bit of a leader at this point, but way too early to be putting all our money on the win. Not that I'm a gambling man, but at this stage. So hedging bets at this point, and really want to emphasise the importance of consultation and get their views of what's important and what matters most to them. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Dollar each way, Councillor. Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I must say I agree substantially with most of Councillor Dennison's comments. I guess let's where to start with this. I think the first thing to be clear about is that I don't think any of us is very comfortable with the pace at which this is moving. And I fear that when you move at pace like this, mistakes get made. So I will just signal early on, I'm uncomfortable at the speed at which this has been done to us. I'm uncomfortable at having to make decisions before all the legislation's been passed. I'm uncomfortable at the way, I would describe it, the way that the cards have been stacked already. So, you can have extra borrowing if you go to a CCO, but if you keep the operations in-house, then your borrowing is less. Those are factors that have been put into this scenario that we're in by government to stack the decision in a certain way. And whilst we're talking about decisions being stacked in a certain way, I'm very uncomfortable with the lack of role for iwi in any of this. And I know that this is a decision of government because they opposed the role that was given to iwi in the previous government's Three Waters legislation. But they've really gone from something that they thought was too much to nothing at all. And I think it's vitally important that iwi are not just informed, but involved from the start, that iwi have a mandated role in these organisations. And it really concerns me that the water entity can be set up and to read this paper, where's the mandated role for iwi? I don't see it. So I'm very concerned about that. And I think the answers to questions betrayed a level of discomfort all round on that. I do understand that once these entities are set up, the level of influence that we will have as elected members is virtually zero. Let's be real about that. because it's been set up in that way. Government doesn't want elected representatives to have any influence in this matter. That's why it's been set up as it has. So where initially I was concerned about proportionality and so on, I'm persuaded, and thank for the officers that have had those conversations with me, I'm persuaded it won't make a blind bit of difference, actually. Because we shouldn't be kidding ourselves about the level of influence we'll have. It will be virtually zero. So whether we have 1 vote or 10 makes no difference. Let's be real. In terms of the decision-making on this, I do have concerns, and I understand how it's come about because of the pace, but I do have concerns that some decisions have apparently been made at mayoral forums as a result of CEs getting together. The decision-making on this must remain in the council chambers. So I just caution when we see, reports that say, oh, well, a decision was made on this, and when we ask, well, where was that decision made and by whom? Oh, well, it was made at a mayoral forum or through the regional CEs. So let's just keep alert to that. Decision-making needs to remain where the responsibility sits. I do think it's very sensible that we keep our options flexible at the moment, because quite honestly, this business of pick me is reminding me a bit like being at school and whether or not, you got picked on the team and were you going to be the last kid that was left that nobody wanted. It's starting to feel a bit like that. So I think we'd be very wise to keep our options as fluid, pardon the pun, as possible going forward. I think on the basis of what has been modelled and of what we've heard, that option 3 here is a reasonable balance between scale, which I understand that we need, and complexity, which is going to make life difficult for us. So, there's got to be a happy medium between scale and the number of councils involved. And because of the difficulty of getting a lot of councils to agree together, I would favour a smaller number of councils if we could still get the level of scale. So for those reasons, I'm keener on option 3, and also because option 3 from the modelling produces the most cost-effective result for ratepayers. I want to finish by just acknowledging staff in all of this, because I think this has just been an absolute roller coaster the last few years of change and preparing reports, and then that work being wasted and starting again, and answering 1,000,001 questions from elected members. And I must say, I really feel for staff, including the CE, having to try and negotiate this. So just, my sympathies are there. I think everyone's struggling a wee bit, but I understand people are doing their best in a very difficult environment. So I'll just check off that I've got all my points listed. I think I have. I'm not comfortable with the whole scenario. And the name, ironically, is the least amount of local water done well than I could possibly imagine. So I'm not happy with how it's being done. I'm not happy with a lot of the ways that as I feel that the cards have been stacked already, so that we're kind of corralled into a certain decision. And I'm not happy at all at the pace. So anyway, we'll do the best we can for our community, as we always do. But yeah, it's not a great look at the moment.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To follow on from others, I really wanted to thank the officers for the careful way they've stepped us through this process, for the huge amount of time and information that's been made available to elected members. I think to reference the Mayor's comments earlier about his experience with talking to councillors from other areas, and we had that opportunity in the regional gathering, I felt that we were really well prepared for those conversations. And I particularly appreciated the diverse ways in which you tried to get information to elected members. That certainly made a very complex and technical subject accessible to all of us. So thank you for your work in that over the last few months. I think I came into this process with aspirations that are as yet unfulfilled, and I'll continue to hold those aspirations through the rest of this. It's my aspiration, I'm sure it's all our aspirations as elected members in Palmerston North, to advocate for the best outcomes for our city. But I am concerned for some of the smaller councils in this process. That obviously can't be our prime focus, but it is a concern of this process. As Councillor Johnson said, yeah, somebody will be the kid left on the sidelines, and there will have to be some kind of backstop position mandated by government, and that is deeply uncomfortable for everybody. I'll continue to aspire to see an appropriate role for Māori in this process, and I don't see that so far. I think it's a huge flaw in where we've got to. Our iwi partners are best placed to help and guide and support and own water, and that is ignored in this process, and I find that deeply, deeply disappointing. And I continue to aspire for scale and efficiency, and that's kind of where we're getting to. The various combinations, this moving feast of who might go with who, it's hard to tell that where we'll finally land actually enables us to give effect to that aspiration, that scale and efficiency must be achieved, otherwise what on earth have we gone through all of this for, apart from to get better borrowing, which does seem to me to be the bottom line that we're all trying to achieve, to get better access to cheaper money. This seems like a lot of work to do to get that. My preference in this is option 3 as we go out for consultation. I'm really interested to seek community feedback on that, and I won't repeat Councillor Johnson's very accurate comments I felt on why that is the best option for us at the moment. But I would say as we go out to consult, this feels a little bit like we're trying to introduce a new potential partner to the family while the potential partner is still playing the dating apps. So I'm not sure there's a balance of commitment here in us saying this is our preference, we really like the look of these people, would you please join us in loving them too, when those people are not quite that committed to us. There's risk there, and we'll continue to try and step carefully through that. I think the recurring theme of my comments is that this is careful stepping. I think we've taken that very seriously. We've gathered information, we've reflected on it thoughtfully, we've engaged meaningfully with colleagues around the region. I'm not sure that same level of thought and care and careful stepping through could be attributed to the government in this regard, and the pace of change is difficult, would be underplaying the situation here. And not having the legislation, I actually can't believe that we're making decisions based on legislation that is not yet legislation. It seems unfathomable to me that that's where we're at. And I think, should this be successful, immense credit should go to local government, the elected members and staff thereof. And I put money on the fact that it won't. Thank you.
Councillor Bellum.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I quite agree with many of the comments that have been made, particularly with Councillor Dennison. This is an end of an era for Palmerston North and significant investment in water by past generations in our water service delivery, and I think we've done it well. We're in a good space, and our KPIs indicate that. So it is an end of an era for Palmerston North Council in delivering these water services so well to the community all of this time. And I absolutely object to having to make the decision based on the best guesses and unknown standards and a bill that isn't out yet. It's just bad decision making, and we're doing the best that we can with the best information that we've got, and I have a huge amount of gratitude to the staff, and I'll echo all those comments about stepping us through this and being really responsive at getting information to us in a timely way. This is a ticking clock on this at a time that our community is already facing just an onslaught of change, accelerated change, and potentially just experiencing a lot of consultation fatigue and change fatigue. I know I am when I'm seeing the headlines. I also have a concern that quite recently in the past, we've been accused of being sneaky and underhanded for going out with options and then landing on a compromise. And in this case, we're going out with what are some half-cooked options, because that is the situation we're in. And that can expose us to more of that criticism if we land somewhere by being different, by being responsive to the situation as it unfolds. So I'm really very resentful about being put in that position through no actual decisions of our own. The comment I wanted to make about option 4 there, about the multi-owned council organisation of the Manawatu-Whanganui region and any other combination of councils, is I would put out a plea for some very, very clear comms there to not give an impression that a full regional model is an available option to us, for it's my understanding that some councils have already exited that process, and we just need to be sure that we communicate that. And the larger the model, the less local it actually is. So I am supportive of what we've got here. I think it's the best we can do at the moment, and it gives us that flexibility that Councillor Johnson mentioned, and just full acknowledgement to the staff, repeating the comments that I made yesterday at the Nature Calls update, that this is a horrendous working situation, protracted over a really long time, and I really feel for you and hope that we can firm this up, get this moving forward so that you have some better direction and know where you're headed. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for what you have put forward. It's more or less along the lines of my thinking. I do have a question whether or not we should leave option 2 in there just as a bit of a backstop, but I can see we don't want to overwhelm people with too many options through consultation. So I know if it's fair, we're going to be quite close to that anyway with the complexity of the scale of work. Listening to the comments made, particularly by Councillor Johnson and Councillor Bowen, I have a question in my head whether or not it is worth us putting a preferred option on the table as we go out to consultation. And so I would like, and I see officers haven't given us amendment sheets, perhaps that was on purpose, but I would like to test, and I'll take your advice, Mr. Chair, if you'd rather it is option 6, an additional motion that Councillor...
Sorry if I can interrupt you, just let's get through this, but I'm quite happy to support something maybe after a cup of tea.
Okay, so we'll do it as a number 6 then, okay. In that case, that's all I'm going to say is I'd like to move an additional motion to have 3 as our preferred option, so we'll discuss it over a cup of tea. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've listened very closely to what people have said. Councillor Dennison probably thinks a lot like I do in this one, but our ratepayers over the last 150 years have paid and worked and built dams and put in pipes. Until today, we've got one of the best water systems in the country. Our drinking water is top notch and the envy of the rest of the country. And here we are, we've got to make a decision of who we're with and alter everything, and we don't even know what the law says because we only presume we know. And to add a quote, we're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. But I do know one thing, it's the ratepayers that will end up paying. And that's a guarantee. I think our ratepayers are going to be disadvantaged for years of paying, and now they're going to have to pay more. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually wasn't going to speak, but because all of my colleagues before me have really outlined what my thinking is as well, and I am very comfortable with these recommendations. But just wanted to reiterate my thanks to staff also for all the work that has gone into passing on a very complex bunch of information to us, and that's been really helpful. And also just the conversations I was starting to have a few minutes ago on this side of the table about whether we should identify a preferred option. I think there is some sense in that, and I'd be very happy to second or support that motion after the break. But just also to add, you know, I'm not under any illusions that this is in any way more affordable for our community, and that is a big disappointment to me. However, we have to proceed. I was considering whether to just abstain or vote against this as a bit of a protest, but in actual fact, we have to progress this. It's legislation, so we don't have that option. So I will support these recommendations and try and be as constructive as possible with the engagement with our community to find the best possible way forward despite the unpleasantness of the whole situation.
Councillor Barrett online.
And acknowledge and endorse a lot of the comments that I've heard from in the room in terms of where we're at and the the frustrations with that situation. My view around this is that as we're just moving to consultation, it would be quite unfortunate to take the most fundamental decision of these options off the table at this point. And I think when we look at those options, option 2, continuing to forge our own way, versus either option 3 or 4, which are different levels of complexity or multi-council operations, is quite a fundamental question that I would like to see put to the community. So probably a little bit challenging working at this remotely, but I'd like to move that we amend to include option 2. And the rationale for that would be that we put this question to the community. It's quite a fundamental question of whether they have a preference to see a simpler model, which has at least some hope of having more direct accountability back to the community members, albeit at a slight cost increment, or if they want a more complex model where potentially we end up being quite a minority voice within a wider entity, albeit at a bit of a cost saving. So in terms of really putting the suite of options to the community, I'd like to see option 2 included, and so indicating that I'd move that. Thank you.
Before we go there, is there a seconder? Okay, Councillor Wood. All right. It's an amendment. Angle, and you know, I'll say that we're going to be the single largest shareholder of any entity, of any partner. So I have a little bit more positivity than some of you, and I admit that this is a terrible way they're doing things, and we shouldn't be stepping into the government's shoes around the process because it's theirs. But do remember, we had a really challenging LTP to try and get over the line, and that doing this by ourselves, we do need some partners. It's making sure we select the right partners. So I won't put option 2 on the table. I think it confuses our public. I have a real issue around the affordability, and some of those questions or those issues can be addressed by scale with good partners, like-minded partners. And I think putting 2 into the mix sort of says that we can do it by ourselves. We can't. We absolutely can't. So please don't vote for this. This really does send some quite mixed signals. I'll leave it at that. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason I'm happy to second this more is just as a safety blanket. The officers have already indicated through questions, if our partners didn't want to partner with us, then what happens is, well, we go back to looking at, is there any possible way we can make a single council CCO work? That's the only way we can access the additional government funding, not government LGFA funding at a cheaper rate. I think it's also useful as a comparative tool, and councillors have put, well, why is option 1 there? And I think it is there as a comparative tool to show that we can't do it on our own. So it adds strength to the argument for having a multiple council CCO. I also think in doing this, it needs to be matched with a preferred option for option 3, and that is what will come after the break, and I'm working on that as well. But I think it makes sense to have it as part of the conversation to highlight the fact that it doesn't work to our community. Otherwise, inevitably, as we go through this consultation process, our community will say, well, couldn't you just do that on your own? And if we don't have the numbers there to show them, well, actually, we can't. I just think it's quite sensible. So I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to briefly just say, look, I won't support option 2. And the reality is that it does not meet the measure of scale, so therefore it is unsustainable. So therefore it should not be included as an option amongst those that we will put out for consultation. It is just a red herring that our public do not need. Thank you.
Councillor Habiter.
Thank you. I won't support it either. It's about, I think, as Councillor Hancock just said, it is about scale, and I think option 3 talks about who the partners potentially will be, as long as they come to, as the CE said, and join our dance party. As long as they are our partners, that's all we want to make sure we secure. But I won't support the option that's been put up, which is option 2. So thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be supporting this amendment for 3 main reasons, and those have all come from comments by my colleagues today in this discussion. First one was from Councillor Johnson, who talked about the lack of control in the options in front of us. I believe this option does give a little bit more control to us in terms of the representation to our community. Also the comments of Councillor Bowen, when she talked about her aspirations for our community. I believe that if we were to have a governance body who would be having our local community's interests, that would be better represented. And the third option, third reason, as outlined by Councillor Wood, in terms of a backstop option, I recognise that this option is definitely not the financially, the preferred option in terms of the financial performance that's modelled at the moment. But I do think it's important to keep it in the mix in terms of those other 3 reasons that I've outlined.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting it. I do have sympathy, and I was in like mind with Councillor Barrett when we were at our last meeting around the options and around the proportionality of representation and all those other things. I had a high level of uncomfort with, that I was comfortable in a position to go on our own as our first bite at it. But having those concerns alleviated, I actually think this would be unhelpful for a consultation period to show this, hang this up as false hope, because the figures just don't stack up for us to do it alone. So that is the rationale. And so why I made the point around comparing option 1 with 2, saying why go out with status quo, actually the single council-owned operation is better than option 1, for sure, because it gives us the funding leverage, but it's still actually not an ideal outcome looking forwards. And so I want to be helpful for our community to give a clearer steer of what's going to bring a better outcome for our city, and option 3 and option 4 give a better option for that. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I won't be supporting this amendment for a couple of reasons. The first one is that I think it's up to us to provide better leadership to the community about what viable options are. And we all know how much time and work we've had to put in to be able to get our heads around this whole situation. We can't realistically expect everybody in the community to put as much time and effort into trying to understand the scenarios. So we're better to provide some leadership as to what we think the best option is for the water services for our city. If we put too many options on the table, people will just think, well, anyone's as good as any other one. And that actually isn't the case. And from our very own papers today, on page 20, it says, this option does not meet financing sufficiency requirements and is therefore not viable. So why would we put it on the table for the community to pick when it's not a viable financial option? I mean, it just seems ridiculous to me. And the second point I want to address is whether or not we would have any more control if we were a single entity as opposed to a multiple council entity. I think we might have the illusion of control. But my understanding of how things will work is that the people who will have control are the regulator and the skills-based board. And we are very much, whether we're one or we're all of the people on the committee that writes the letter of expectations and appoints people to the board, we're the bit players. So the sooner we understand that, the better.
Back to you, Councillor Barrett, for right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, colleagues, for the comments. The most fundamental decision that is in front of the community and in front of us is whether or not we go alone or whether we go with partners. That decision should have community voice. So I'd urge you to support this so that we can hear from the community about what their preferences are and what their views are around the trade-offs between complexity and finances. So please do support this so we can get a full input from the community, and would encourage folks to have a bit of faith in the community's ability to get their heads around the fundamentals, like whether we go alone or whether we go with partners. So please do keep this on the table. Thank you.
All right, councillors, we will vote on the amendment only around leaving option 2 in. If you could vote, please. And that has failed. 6 votes for and 8 against. All right. We'll move through to the substantive, and as Councillor Barrett was last in the queue, I'll just exercise my right to reply. Look, councillors, thanks for all your comments, and I appreciate the angst, and I think we've got to be careful we're not stepping into the government's shoes on the process. I think you've articulated that really well. I have a slight bit more positivity than some of you around the process, or where it may end up. And I do appreciate, again, it's the cards we're being dealt with, and it's actually what influence we can have. And I think Councillor Johnson, you've emphasised that well in your on your debate. The pace, the time, put that aside. I'm 100% with you on that, and actually. All of the councils that I've spoken to are saying the same things in that space, which tells me that there is a bit of a disconnect, as we know, from our colleagues in the big house in Wellington. But is it a bad thing, partnering with some like-minded colleagues? Maybe we need a little bit more time at the dating and the dancing, or which way we swipe on an app. But, you know, yeah. I do think our partners in the South and MD are our best bet, and let's have perhaps a discussion about that a little bit later around a preference. Can I be clear that the influence, we will be the biggest shareholding council in any entity we enter. So just do remember that, but it's what happens thereafter. Scale is absolutely important, and I think I've emphasised that, and we will need partners, as their last vote emphasised. Most of you understand that. I do too, like the other mayors, really share the sentiments around iwi. We've gone back so many times to the DIA and said, where's iwi in this? And, you know, it's radio silence. So we want them around the table, and I think that's one way where we can influence, and I think it was pretty well a shared conversation with mayors around how can we get them into the mix, whether it's a mandated iwi leaders forum that the board absolutely has to speak to and listen to and take on their views, and pushing for a Māori skills-based director at least, or putting into some skill sets that they need to have an understanding of Te Ao Māori views. So I think there is some influence there. Can I just emphasise too, and it probably was overstated, and I'm sorry if I'm going to have a little crack at the officers, but the decisions made around the mayoral forum were guidelines. They weren't decisions, because we needed to put something in place to move forward. I spoke up on record. I spoke up about the city's views, and you actually, without me telling you, you actually went and mandated it with one of our resolutions, I think the next meeting or the third meeting later. So it was well and truly known what the views of the city were around proportional representation. So please don't think I've sold you down the river or signed you up to something that you didn't want to do. That really was not the case at all, and they were very much just guidelines, and perhaps overstated that this is what was decided. Again, can I just thank the staff? Been a heck of a journey, and I mean staff from an operational side through to the transitional side to the management. I know you're living and breathing this as we are. I think as a council we're well over the top of this. I think you all have shown an incredible amount of understanding of the issues, and I think that does set us up well for the future. So I think the reading, the understanding, knowing what we are getting into, some of the real issues you're well over the top of. Our colleagues in local government, I don't think are. So congratulations on making sure we're as skilled as we can in that sense. So I just want to finish off with saying the scale, the efficiencies that come with that, can help this council. I do have some hope and positivity that we will be able to work through this. And look, I'll ask you to support this, and I'm happy to, after a cup of tea, to have a look at a preference after the break. Thank you. We will vote. And that is passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we've deserved a cup of tea. Back in the chamber at 11:30. Thank you. Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody. And any latecomers? All right, thank you councillors. Right, number 6, and this is around showing a preference and that council agree that the option, well I'll move it, that's fine, you can change it out. Oh, here he comes. That multi-council owned water organisation, sub-regional, that includes PNCC, MDC, HDC and Kapiti Coast District Council as the preferred option for consultation. And Councillor Wood, if you want to speak to that.
Firstly, just note it's Councillor Johnson who's seconding it, not Councillor Harpiter.
Okay, so we've got Councillor Wood moving it, seconded by Councillor Johnson. They're all fighting over who's going to second to move it. I think that's a good sign. Over to you, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I thought I'd start by keeping the dating references going by suggesting we get down on a knee and make a proposal. I think it's important for a few reasons that we go out with a preferred option in our consultation. Just to clarify, according to officers, the wording of the legislation says proposed, so I just need to understand, is it proposed or preferred? Being checked and it's preferred. Excellent. For a few key reasons. Firstly, this ranks the best in our multi-criteria analysis in terms of our objectives as a city, and so I think it's important we reflect that by giving it the rank as our preferred option. Secondly, it reflects the decisions that other councils have made in that option 3 is the only real option we have on the table. Option 1 isn't workable, we know that financially. Option 4, we've already had 2 councils in the region pull out of even exploring that model, so to go out and say, well, we think we could do a full Manawatu Wanganui region, it isn't really a thing. Yes, there are potentially some unusual configurations inside that that could exist, but in terms of a clear-cut, defined and implementable option, option 3 is the clearest that we have on the table to present to our community. It's for reasonably urban and geographically close neighbours who share a good, as the Mayor's already outlined in his speech, a good alignment of water assets, water quality and shared thinking. And really importantly for me, it's a signal to other councils, particularly Horowhenua, who's already gone out with a preferred option of just Horowhenua and Kapiti. I think it's important to those councils further down the country, particularly Kapiti, who we've had less to do with historically being out of our region, that we make it clear we are serious about this option going out to our community. Of course not to predetermine the result of community consultation and see what comes back. Of course not to predetermine the decisions of other councils in the Manawatu Wanganui region and the configurations that could come out of that model, which is why it's important we leave option 4 on the table as part of what we consider. But I think given this is the most cost-effective option for ratepayers, given it's the best in our multi-criteria analysis, and given it is slightly outside the usual regional scope in which we operate in, I think it's sensible that we make this our preferred option for consultation. Look forward to the discussion.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, happy to second this because I think we should send a signal to residents about where our thinking is at the moment. And I think it's actually not helpful to residents to go out with options without any indication of council's view of those options. It doesn't mean that people have to agree with us, but at least we're clear and straightforward in our thinking and our preferences at the moment. And I think that that's important for residents to understand which way we're heading, at present at least. And secondly, to continue the dating analogy, I don't think it's going to help us if we're playing hard to get. I think actually we need to make a bit of commitment to indicate where we would like to end up and to show some commitment sort of from our side. So without, as Councillor Wood says, without predetermining anything, but I think we need to indicate what we would like as the preferred outcome, and hopefully that then sends a signal to other councils about our thinking too. So I think there's no harm in indicating a preference, and I don't actually think it'll be controversial. I feel like there's good support for that in the room. So ask for your support on this. Thank you.
Before I go to Councillor Bowen, look, I too agree with the mover and the seconder. This is our best option for all the reasons that you've both outlined. The affordability, the scale of connections and population the communities of interest, and I think that's really important. It is a more urbanised model than perhaps some of the wider models that could eventuate if we just left things to float. I do think as elected leaders, we should show some leadership in saying we think this is the best option, but without predetermining what our public say. I'm sure there'll be some people asking, well, they'll certainly ask me, what do you think? So I think there is, and knowing the councils, we have a lot to do with MDC, we have quite a bit to do with Horowhenua, less so with Kapiti, but they're becoming closer to us with train connections, with transport connections, and with actually transferable workforces. So I think it's a good model. No, I'll leave it at that. That's fine. Councillor Bowden.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yep, I think my first thought was clearly this is my preferred option. I wondered if there was any risk to us in going out and saying it's our preferred option. I think there are some risks potentially. Some people have said they really want to get into bed with us, and other people have said they'd definitely rather not. But I think at this point, I'm not quite at the going down on one knee stage, but I am prepared to offer some kind of exclusivity in this arrangement. So I can't see a downside of us being clear with our community that we've done our homework, we've looked at the options on the table, and this looks like our best bet on current information, and see where that takes us. And let's just hope we are looking sufficiently attractive that somebody swipes right.
Sorry, I won't comment. Councillor Zabellan.
I don't have any cool analogies, I'm afraid. I have a little bit of hesitance about going out with a preferred option. It's been really helpful to listen to the conversation, though. From my perspective, trust and confidence in council is low at the moment. So the impact of us saying this is our preference doesn't necessarily engender confidence in that option with everybody. It's not necessarily a benefit if there's not a huge level of confidence in us reaching a preferred option in the first place. I'm aware that that's not a universal view, but it is a view that is there that we hear. I think in reading the modelling in the papers, most of us are pretty aware that the one option clearly performs better across the metrics that we're looking at. And I really do appreciate the argument that going with a preferred option is a clear signal to other councils and potential partners, and that there's probably no harm by indicating a preference. But I just do hesitate because it already feels like a bit of a contrived consultation where we have to put up one option that we know isn't viable. And then if we say there's three options, one's not viable, one we prefer, and one's sort of a bit shaky, I'm not super convinced that it feels like a robust consultation, and I don't think that's not our doing, but I am aware of what that might look like if we say that this is our preferred option. So I'm going to keep listening. I don't know if that's helpful input, but that's the reason for my hesitation to put my support behind choosing a preferred option. If we were choosing a preferred option, obviously number 3 would be it. I'll keep listening and thinking. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I really like this suggestion, and I like the way that it's been put up. I think there's two ways forward with this. I think the strategy side of it is good to have this as a preferred option when you're looking at the other councils. It's good to put this up for a strategy point of view, to say that we want to have a good relationship with Manawatu District, with Horowhenua and with Kapiti. I think this is a very good recommendation. And for our community, I think a lot of people in the community don't really know what to do with the water, and I think by us putting up a preferred recommendation, it helps guide them in their thinking. So I think as a council, we need to be leaders. We need to be leaders of our community. We need to put up a recommendation that we need to guide our community with, because it is a big decision. So I think we need to be leaders, and that's why I think this is a good decision for us to guide our community with. Thank you, councillors.
All right. Yes, he does. He does want to write a reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just think it's worth addressing some of Councillor Zabellan's concerns that she raised, because is an interesting point around the validity of the consultation process we're going through. What I would say is your concerns apply whether we have a preferred option or not, in my view. Either way, there really isn't a lot of choice in this matter. As I said in my opening comments, option 4 may or may not be an option depending. If none of the other councils had already pulled that off the table, then I would suggest we shouldn't have a preferred option. We should have been looking at these two as equals. But because we've already seen indication from 2 councils, and I suspect more to come, that model isn't something they want to go down, I don't think it's useful for us to give false hope to the community by putting that up as an option in equal with option 3. And so I think there's some value in us putting this forward. I agree with the leadership point. You raise an interesting point around confidence in council in a large number of areas, and perhaps that's true, but when it comes to a technical matter of water, where, I mean, we've all read 120 pages or whatever it was of quite technical data, it isn't reasonable to expect that many, if any, in our community are going to do the level of work that we've done. And so part of our role as elected members is to be interpreters of information and providers of information to the community in a way they can understand. I think back to last time we had a preferred option, which was on our long-term plan consultation on the split between capital and land value, and that came with an explanation of why it was council's preferred option. And I think that, for me, is why it would be useful for us to have that, to explain to the community, this is why we're thinking this, what do you think? So I hope that allays some of your concerns. Here's hoping for a happy wedding with no altar objections.
Right. Let's vote, please. It's passed 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, we just have number 8 on our agenda paper. It's around presentation of Part 1 Public Committee meeting recommendations around Rangitane or Manawatu meeting of the 30th of October. I'll ask one of the committee members, Councillor Naylor, to speak to that.
I'd just like to move present the presentation of Part 1 Public Rangitane or Manawatu Committee recommendations from its meeting on the 30th of October.
Seconded by Councillor Dennison. Thank you. There being no further commentary, we'll vote, please. And that is passed 11 votes for and 3 abstentions. All right. That brings us to the end of our meeting, and if I could ask Councillor Fitzgerald to close karakia, please.
Tēnā tātou te whare. Pe karakia mo te whakamutunga o te rā. Ka puta ki te whai au, ki te ao marama, whakamaua ki a tīna, hau me hui e, tā ki